So here are the topics I'm going over. These are all topics that I find come up in classroom discussion a lot. Also topics that are important for a philosophical take on abortion, and the aspects of the Munson reading that I think are important. So we're covering who has abortions, some facts about human development, the Bible and abortion. This is something that is not discussed in Munson, but I think there are some interesting things going on here, and certainly these are ideas that are very important for a lot of students. The technologies surrounding abortion, the law. I think a lot of people still don't. There's a lot of confusion and misinformation about the content, for instance, of Roe v. Wade, so we need to clear that up. And then finally, the arguments of the philosophers on abortion. And here I'm not covering all of the philosophers that we have in the readings. I'm just focusing on two important ones, really the two classic philosophical statements on abortion, Judith Jarvis Thomson and Marquise. All right, so this is the statistics on who has abortion. This is supplementary to the information in Munson. I gathered most of these slides from the Alan Guttmacher Institute. I picked these up in 2003. The information here is, I guess, older than the information in the Munson textbook, but it all paints roughly the same picture. The Alan Guttmacher Institute is a nonpartisan group. It's respected by both sides of the abortion debate as a reliable source for just basic facts. For instance, how many abortions are performed a year. So as you can see from this chart, the abortion rates started to go up actually before Roe v. Wade. They were going up even before the abortion laws were liberalized in many states. And they continued on that same trajectory after Roe v. Wade. The way this chart looks, it seems as though the law is merely keeping up with popular attitudes towards abortion and is not strongly influencing the number of abortions that are performed. In any case, abortion went from being anathema to having the level of acceptance it has today by the 1980s. And you see that the abortion rates peaked at around 1.5 million a year and have gone down slightly since then. Okay. Isn't it just an important, this is a 2 data point slide, but I think these are some important data to remember. Almost half of all pregnancies are unintended, and one of the facts that drives the abortion rate in the United States is the fact that so many people have unintended pregnancies, and this is due. Well, there are many possible causes for this, but obviously additional information about contraception and availability of contraception could affect. Okay, outcomes of unplanned pregnancies. Well, most unplanned pregnancies end in abortion. This is another slide with very few data points on it, but the data points are worth emphasizing. Okay. Although the decriminalization, the legalization of abortion did not have a dramatic effect on abortion rates, the trend was already in existence before abortion was legalized. One effect that the legal decisions did have was a dramatic decline in abortion-related deaths. So that says something. And you can see here actually the decline starts to come when the states liberalize the laws. The data before then has a decline and an increase. Perhaps it's just messy data. I don't know. But in any case, right now, abortion is quite safe. All right, in discussing who has abortions, I want to define something called the classic situation. Now, people who work on the abortion issue will tell you that there's no such thing as the classic situation, and obviously everyone's individual situation is different, and in fact there are many, many cases that are nothing like this situation. Nevertheless, this is the situation that, one, I think most people have in mind when they picture someone seeking an abortion, and two, all of the traits that I'm attributing to the classic situation are things that are true of the majority of abortion seekers. So here's how I define the classic situation. It's a first trimester abortion. The mother's physical health is not threatened by the pregnancy. The mother is young but not a child, and the mother is poor. I think for each of these you'll find that this is true of the majority of abortions. So in 1999, for instance, 88% of all abortions were in the first trimester. And if you look at the chart, you'll see in even more detail that the remaining abortions are early in the second trimester, and it's only a tiny fraction of abortions that occur after week 21. And in almost all of these cases, something has gone dramatically wrong. The mother is young but not a child. In 2002, 56% of all women having abortions were in their 20s. This is a bit of a change. The abortion rate for teenagers has been going down, and so now the majority of abortions are for people between the ages of 20 and 29 years. Poverty. 57% of women seeking abortion are poor or low income. This is important because often the ability to support a child is a big motivator in seeking an abortion. Again, late-term abortion. This is less than 1.1% of all abortions. Now, 41% of states have laws against post-viability abortions. There's a lot of talk about, the irony that some premature babies are, people take heroic measures to save some premature babies when other babies are in fact aborted, or fetuses are aborted. Well, in fact, there's no evidence that a viable fetus has ever been aborted. And in most states this is against the law anyway. So why do these things occur? Well, the most common reasons for late-term abortion are the health of the mother, the quality of the life of the fetus, and then some isolated cases of intense denial of pregnancy. So teenagers, homeless people, drug users, and of course homeless teenage drug users can all be in denial that they are pregnant for a very long period of time. Now, there's no statistical information about the proportion of late-term abortions that fall into these categories. Basically, we only have anecdotal evidence, and the anecdotes all fall into these three categories. The next major topic I want to discuss is human development. This is both an important issue and a fascinating one. I mean, one of the reasons that I touch on it is just that I find it so very compelling. It's certainly a source of great visual images. Also, I think people play fast and loose with a lot of information about human development. In debates over abortion, people jump back and forth in talking about late pregnancy, the status of the fetus late in pregnancy, the status of an embryo early in pregnancy, what traits the developing fetus has at these varying stages. So I just want to clear up some basic facts. And the first thing I want to clear up, I want to emphasize, is the distinction between fertilization and implantation. Now, anyone who's had a high school health class knows about these two events, but I don't think people are particularly clear on what changes take place at each moment. And also, there's a lot of confusion around the moral significance of these two stages. So, both fertilization and implantation have been singled out as the start of the pregnancy. Doctors in particular tend to say that the pregnancy starts with implantation. Pro-life activists will tend to say that the pregnancy starts with fertilization. Now, the pregnancy is an arbitrary category anyway. What is not arbitrary and more important is where the beginning of the moral status of the fetus. It's interesting to note that amongst people who say the developing human acquires moral status very early, there are both those who put the relevant line at fertilization and those who put the relevant line at implantation. That was wordy. I can try and say that better. Different people apply different moral weights to the lines of fertilization and implantation. Okay, and there's good reason for this. Let's start with fertilization. Fertilization, sperm meets egg. Well, often this is referred to as the beginning of life. This is imprecise. Both sperm and egg are alive before they meet. You can easily tell the difference between a live sperm and a dead sperm. So it's just mistaken to call it the beginning of life. It's also a mistake to call it the beginning of an individual life. You can't even really say that it is the start of the life of an individual fetus. The reason is this. If you take an unimplanted egg and split it in half, you will get twins. Furthermore, if an unimplanted embryo and split it in half, you will get twins. In fact, if you have an embryo that has divided 3 times, so it has 8 cells, you actually have 8 potential people there. Every cell of the pre-implantation embryo is what they call totipotent. Each cell on its own has the capacity to create a complete human being. The other thing that's interesting is that if you start out with twins at this stage, the two can merge and there will not be any difficulty in the pregnancy, particularly if they are identical twins. Although there are also cases of non-identical twins merging pre-implantation. And the person actually will just have DNA that is different in the different cells in their body. They're called a chimera. This happens in nature. So fertilization is not the beginning of life, nor is it the beginning of an individual life. It is the beginning of a process that takes you from zygote to embryo to blastocyst. I want to take a bit of time and emphasize the nature and structure of the blastocyst here. Because most of the time when you talk about embryos that are in a laboratory, in a petri dish, embryos being used for in vitro fertilization, all of these are subjects of a great deal of ethical controversy. The embryos you're talking about are blastocysts. They are balls of about 300 cells with a little cell mass inside, about 20 cells, and that cell mass contains the very precious stem cells. The picture, the bottom picture here of an embryo implanting is a picture of a blastocyst, and you can see the shell and you can see the inner cell mass. All right, so what happens at implantation? Well, a number of very important things happen. First of all, individuation. You now have a fixed number of fetuses. If one blastocyst implants, you will get one baby at the end of the process. This is the start of an individual life. Furthermore, there is a dramatic increase in the survival chances of the embryo. Prior to implantation, it's not even clear how many blastocysts are simply naturally expelled or miscarried, but the number is probably around 50%. So if you are concerned with the potentiality of the fetus, the potentiality of an embryo changes dramatically on implantation. This is also the moment where the embryonic axis forms. The embryonic axis is the beginning of differentiation of the cells in the embryo, and the beginning. It eventually will become the spinal column. So this is an important developmental feature. Okay, so here are some more details on the zygote, embryo, and blastocyst. I mentioned some of this in the previous slide. I'll emphasize a few more points about the blastocyst. You have a hollow ball of 100 to 300 cells, the inner cell mass of 20 stem cells. The inner cell mass are now pluripotent stem cells. They are not capable of becoming any kind of cell. With the early embryo, every cell is totipotent. In the blastocyst, the stem cells are merely pluripotent. They can become almost any kind of cell. The only kind of cell they cannot become is a placental cell. And forming the placenta is the job of the cells in the shell, the outer shell. Okay. So here's a bit of vocabulary that will be important when we get to the, particularly when we get to the stem cell debate. So I'll just take a chance to look at these over. So here are some features of later development and some milestones that sometimes get labeled morally significant. The first thing is that within 4 to 5 weeks, proto-organs appear and the blood begins to circulate. This is the origin of the slogan that every abortion stops a beating heart. So if you feel like the presence of blood circulation and a beating heart is morally significant, here you are. At 8 weeks, you get a recognizably human shape. The embryo officially gets the title fetus, and you have detectable neural activity. Now, it's important to remember that not every bit of electricity dancing across a neuron amounts to a thought. At 12 weeks, we have electricity dancing across the neurons in the higher brain. Still no evidence immediately that this counts as thought, but it is certainly a necessary condition for thought. Between the 24th and the 26th week, the major pain circuit in humans is completed. This is the pain circuit that involves what we call C fibers. C fibers are different than the delta fibers. Delta fibers have come online earlier. Delta fibers are present in both humans and animals. C fibers are present in humans and chimpanzees only, and they are associated with what we think of as conscious pain. The delta fibers will fire when you put your hand on a hot stove and then you jerk it away before you even realize what has happened. The C fibers are the ones that fire when you actually say to yourself, "My God, this hurts." So those start to come online in the 24th to 26th week, and the circuit is completely online by the 29th week. Note that this is also the beginning of time of the period of viability using current technology. You can start to save babies, although there are often major complications. You can start to save babies that are born during this period of time. So, viability is 24 to 26 weeks, depending upon race and gender, technology. It's a moving line, which is one reason why it's odd to declare it to be a morally significant line. Less than 1% of babies born in the 25th week survive. So the other thing about viability is that it's a blurry line. And you can say babies prior to the 25th week are viable, but that's a very rare occasion. And in all these situations, physical and mental defects are. Okay. When in human development does one start to feel pain? I tried to make a list of all the information about this. I put this list together, I guess, in 2003. I don't believe more data has come out, although the debate has continued since this time. And so basically in this chart, I break down the camps. There are people out there who say the fetus starts feeling pain in the first trimester. These people are invariably pro-life activists. There are conventional researchers, conventional embryologists, developmental biologists, MDs, will put the line for the arrival of fetal sentience somewhere in mid-gestation. And all these people are typically looking at the arrival of the C-fiber circuit and the maturation of it. There is a minority, led by a guy named Derbyshire, who are really, really old school and say that even newborn babies do not feel pain. In fact, babies do not feel pain until they can talk. It's pretty intense. This was actually conventional opinion for a very long time, which is why it used to be that infant surgery, surgery on newborns, did not involve any anesthetic. It only involved a paralytic agent. Well, this still occurs. The last statistics I saw on it were from the mid-90s, but even in the mid-90s, 50% of neonatal surgery occurred without proper anesthesia. Well, this guy Derbyshire is the representative of this old view that, in fact, newborn babies don't even feel pain. The next major section is going to be on the Bible and abortion. I find one fact remarkable. The Bible nowhere directly refers to abortion. Although abortion is now considered an incredibly important religious issue, it was simply not on the radar of the ancient Hebrews. It was not on the radar at the time of Christ. In fact, for the most part, abortion did not become a hot-button moral issue until the 19th century. Why this is, well, is a topic that we'll have to leave for another time. Nevertheless, once abortion became a hot-button moral issue, people started to look back to the Bible to see if they could find passages that could be interpreted as opposed to abortion or even supporting it. This is projecting an issue onto the past that was not on the minds of the writers of the Bible. The first thing to note when you try and interpret Scripture in order to get a stance on abortion is that simply citing Exodus 20:13, simply citing the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, won't get you anywhere. It says thou shalt not kill, but it doesn't say whom you shouldn't kill. In fact, often people will translate that as thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit unjustified killing. It's probably an accurate translation, but the point is it doesn't help us here because it gives us no information about whether the abortion amounts to an unjustified killing. Okay. There are a list of passages, I've got them down here, that are sometimes interpreted as being pro-life. And they're all very similar. I'm going to take a look at just one of them, Jeremiah. Before I formed thee in the belly I knew thee, and before thou camest forth of the womb I sanctified thee and adorned thee to be a prophet unto nations. This is God speaking to the prophet Jeremiah. Now sometimes this is taken to be evidence that God gives moral status to you before you were born. After all, the prophet Jeremiah had the status of prophet even before he was born. But wait a minute. If you look closely at the passage, it actually says that he had the status of a prophet even before he was conceived. Presumably, God had this plan in mind for him at the beginning of the universe. So it doesn't actually say anything about conception as a line. It's true, though, that this doesn't just apply to prophets. It could apply to human beings. Other human beings. But in fact, for that matter, it could apply to a flea, since it is really just about omniscience. God has a plan for everyone before we were born, even, indeed, before he created the universe. In the Jewish tradition, the Bible is interpreted very differently on the subject of abortion. And the key passage is actually Exodus 21:22, which is interpreted as saying, as implying that abortion, at least early in the pregnancy, is morally acceptable. So this is the passage. If men strive and would wound a pregnant woman so that her fruit be expelled, but no harm befall her, then he shall be fined as her husband shall assess, and the matter placed before the judges. But if harm befall her, then shalt thou give life for life. So look, if you assault a pregnant woman, there are two different penalties given. One for causing an abortion, and one for killing the woman. This seems to indicate that an adult woman has a different moral status than a fetus. So in the Jewish tradition, this is taken as an extremely important data point. Now, there's some additional arguments that are often given. I list them below. I'll just give you a chance to read over those. The next major subject is the technologies surrounding abortion. Most of these slides are pretty detailed, but I'm going to provide some audio for the slide on emergency contraception and the slide on techniques for late-term abortion, because these are controversial. Emergency contraception. Emergency contraception includes both emergency contraceptive pills and IUDs. We won't be covering IUDs right now. I only want to look at the various pills. Now, there are a number of combinations of pills that can be used for this. The classic is a combination pill, a combination of estrogen and progesterone. But you can also use just estrogen in high doses or just progesterone. And of these hormonal methods, it's the last, progesterone only, that is now currently preferred, and this is marketed in the United States under the name Plan B. You can also take RU-486, which is used later in pregnancy for chemical abortion. You can take it immediately after sex as a form of contraception. This is also considered a preferred method of emergency contraception in pill form right now. All of these work the same way. This is the confirmed method. This is the confirmed mechanism that they operate by. All the emergency contraceptive pills delay or block a surge in a hormone called LH, and the LH is needed for ovulation. They can observe these effects very closely. So hormone measurements show that the pills will block the surge in LH, and ultrasound studies will confirm that because that surge is blocked, the development of the follicle, which eventually releases the egg, is either delayed or blocked. So this is an established mechanism. There are some additional effects of emergency contraceptive pills, in particular RU-486. If you take RU-486 after ovulation and you take about 10 times the recommended dose, you can actually prevent the implantation of a fertilized egg. Also, a drug similar to RU-486 delivered repeatedly in large doses to bonnet monkeys will block implantation. Evidence of effects like this have been used by pro-life groups to argue that, in fact, emergency contraceptive is a form of abortion. What the argument works like this. First, you have to assert that the morally significant line is not implantation, but conception. Then you have to assert, as a matter of empirical fact, that emergency contraception can block implantation. The evidence for that empirical fact is pretty sketchy. I've cited 2 studies above. To my knowledge, these are the best studies, and it doesn't get you very far. Now, a lot of pro-life groups are, in fact, even going farther than this. The American Life League has now declared that all hormonal birth control is abortion. And there's simply no evidence of this. Hormonal birth control works by blocking ovulation. So there's no reason to believe that a fertilized egg is ever prevented from being implanted. So the FDA and all of the scientific review articles that I have looked at concur that pill-based emergency contraception is indeed contraception and not abortion. We have seen that emergency contraception should not be confused with chemical abortion. Let's now take a closer look at the technology of chemical abortion. In the United States, the only drug which is legal that can induce an abortion is RU-486. It's marketed under the name Mifeprex and sometimes goes under the generic name mifepristone. This is a pill which causes the lining of the uterus along with the zygote to be expelled. More precisely, what happens is the first drug prevents the uterus from preparing for the implantation of the zygote, and then a second drug causes the lining of the uterus and the zygote to be expelled. It is effective in the 5th to 10th week of pregnancy, so this is a form of abortion that is only possible for early pregnancies. And it is 96.9% effective. After much struggle, it's now available in the United States. There have, however, been 7 unexplained deaths as a result of taking Mifeprex. These may have been the result of contaminated pills. The deaths were clustered in California. There right now is no explanation for how it happened, although they are associated with toxic shock coming from a bacterial infection, which is partially why it's believed to have been the result of contaminated pills. Although the 7 deaths is a small number, it is statistically significant. So doctors are investigating the source of this outbreak. The major technology used in abortion still is surgical abortion. There are 3 major techniques here. For early pregnancy, up to 12 weeks, you use dilation and evacuation. Basically, you dilate the cervix and suction out the contents of the uterus. After 12 weeks, you need to use dilation and extraction. This means that you dilate you dilate the cervix and extract the contents of the uterus. It used to be that for midterm abortions, you would use dilation and curettage, where you dilate the cervix and scrape out the contents of the uterus with a spoon-shaped instrument called a curette. Late-term abortion. There are many techniques that can be used to abort a fetus late in the pregnancy. Once again, this is a very rare occurrence. It's less than 1% of abortions. When it happens, it generally happens in an ugly way. There are no pretty ways to end a pregnancy at this stage. Now, some of these techniques have been labeled partial birth abortion. Partial birth abortion is not a medical term, and attempts to define it legally have always wound up including procedures that can be used both in late-term abortion and earlier in the pregnancy. So although it is a misnomer to talk about partial birth abortion, we can talk about the techniques that are used to perform abortion late in the pregnancy. And and they are not pretty. And that's sort of the origin of the partial birth abortion rhetoric, is the ugliness of the techniques that are used for late-term abortion. So basically what you get are three versions of dilation and extraction. Dilation and extraction is a technique for surgical abortion that can be used earlier in the pregnancy. When you use it later in the pregnancy, there are a couple of different ways to do it. Three different ways. One is to dilate the cervix. That's always the dilation part of dilation and extraction, and then suck the brain out of the skull of the fetus, collapse the fetus, and extract it that way. Another option is to actually use a drug to stop the fetus's heart and induce labor. The third version is just to go with the classical dilation and extraction. Dilate the cervix, dismember the fetus, and remove the parts. Section 5, the law. I've got a list of important Supreme Court rulings here. You can actually print this out and use it to study with. Further details on all of these is included in your textbook. You will need to know these. Especially you need to know the content of the Roe v. Wade ruling, which is covered in the next two slides. Let me hit some highlights on this slide. The modern era of abortion law gets started with Roe v. Wade in 1973, which says that the state can only regulate abortion with the aim of protecting the fetus after fetal viability. An important supplement to this is the 1976 ruling in Planned Parenthood versus Danforth, which establishes that a woman does not need the consent of her husband to have an abortion. What goes on in a pregnancy is entirely up to the woman in consultation with her doctor. There's been a more recent trend in abortion rulings that have restricted rights to access to abortion. And these can be seen in Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992 and Webster versus Reproductive Health Services in 1989. In these cases, the court upheld laws that restrict access to abortion by establishing waiting periods, requiring parental consent, requiring counseling, requiring doctors to test for viability, and things like that. Webster versus Reproductive Health Services went further and criticized the reasoning of Roe v. Wade, in particular criticizing the trimester system. Planned Parenthood versus Casey, on the other hand, explicitly endorsed Roe and said that it continued to have the force of precedent. Okay, so what is this ruling that has the force of precedent that is so very important? Well, Blackmun asserted in Roe v. Wade that during the first 2 trimesters of a pregnancy, a woman's right to an abortion is protected by her right to privacy. And this means that the state can only pass laws governing abortion in the first 2 trimesters for the purposes of preserving the woman's health. It cannot intervene on behalf of the fetus. All right, so this gets a lot of attention because the right to privacy is not mentioned explicitly in the Constitution. And when people start arguing about the legitimacy of a right to privacy, they always immediately think of Roe v. Wade and imagine that there was this new right to privacy that was invented by Justice Blackmun in Roe v. Wade for the purpose of protecting abortion. Well, in fact, the Supreme Court has viewed a right to privacy as implicit in the Constitution since 1891. It is implicit in the 1st, 4th, 5th, 9th, and 14th Amendments. The ruling in Roe v. Wade certainly has reinforced the idea that there is a right to privacy, but the right to privacy was not invented for the purpose of the Roe v. Wade ruling. So,
according to Blackmun, abortion is protected by the right to privacy, but not completely. At some point in the pregnancy, the state's interest in protecting potential life becomes sufficiently compelling to sustain regulation. What that means is that at some point, the fetus is close enough to being a person that the state has the right to intervene on its behalf. And Blackmun, not sure where else to draw the line, wound up drawing that line at fetal viability, which he took to be approximately the beginning of the third trimester. So, one important thing that goes on in this ruling is that Blackmun decides that the term persons, as it is used in the Constitution, does not refer to unborn people, unborn humans. So all the references in the Constitution to people are to postnatal people. For instance, citizens are defined as people born or naturalized in the United States. Also, in the 19th century, which is when all of these amendments, when the last of these amendments was passed, abortion practices were pretty liberal. Actually, what the 19th century saw was the rise of abortion as a moral issue and a gradual restriction on rights to abortion. But certainly when the 14th Amendment was passed, you had enough of a sense, abortion laws were liberal enough that it would be unreasonable to say that the 14th Amendment is meant to protect the unborn. So this is where Blackmun then introduces the viability standard. He says, with respect to the state's important and legitimate interest in potential life, the compelling point is at viability. This is so because the fetus then presumably has the capacity of a meaningful life outside the mother's womb. In other words, at some point the state has the right to start protecting the fetus. Well, when is that? Well, when the fetus is actually separable from the mother, when it has an existence that you can think of as separate from the mother. And that's why fetal viability was singled out in the Roe v. Wade ruling.
Section 6, Arguments of the Philosophers. Right now I'm only going to look at two. I'm going to look at Thompson and Marquise. There are many additional arguments that you are responsible for. You'll have to look in your book for those. I'm emphasizing these because they are considered the two classic arguments, philosophical arguments on abortion, and they are both extremely deep and extremely well done, although people tend to find the arguments from the opposite side of the abortion debate, when done philosophically, bizarre. So pro-life people will find Thompson's arguments bizarre. Pro-choice people will find Marquise arguments bizarre. That's part of the way that philosophical arguments just wind up appearing. Okay, Thompson. Thompson is actually writing before Roe v. Wade, and she takes a very interesting stance. Her thesis is probably the most important thing about her argument. What she says is that even if the fetus were a person, women would still have a right to an abortion in a wide variety of situations. So she is conceding the most important feature of the pro-life argument, typically. Pro-lifers want to say above all else that the fetus is a person. And she says, well, okay, sure, for the sake of argument, I'll agree that the fetus is a person. I don't really believe that. I'll just agree for the sake of argument. Even then, abortion is still morally acceptable in a wide variety of situations. Her tactic for showing that abortion is acceptable in these situations is to create a series of analogies. I won't go into detail about all of these. The main point, though, is that with each of these is that she creates a situation that is she creates a situation where you have a full-fledged person, an adult, someone you have to grant moral status to. And that person is dependent on your body for their life. And what she claims is that in these situations, you are not obligated to give your body to someone else. Therefore, a woman's right to bodily autonomy trumps the moral status of the fetus, even if the fetus is a person. The most famous of these is the violin player story, and it's worth looking exactly at what the outcome of this story is. I've got a description of it later on the PowerPoint slide. Right now we'll just look at what this is meant to show. This is meant to show that your right to your body can sometimes outweigh another person's life. And the later arguments all attempt to expand on this to show that there are even more situations where your right to your body can sometimes outweigh another person's right to life.
I just want to highlight a few of these arguments. So after the violin player story, Thompson gives an argument about maternal-fetal conflict. And here she is simply arguing that you have a right to an abortion if you need it to save your life. This proceeds just from the basic fact that killing in self-defense is generally considered to be a justified form of killing. So even if the fetus were a person, you would have the right to an abortion to save your life. After that, Thompson returns to these arguments by analogy. She tells a story about the actor Henry Fonda, which is meant to suggest that you have a right to an abortion in a variety of non-life-threatening situations. And she also tells a story about a burglar, and related to this is the people seed story. And these are meant to establish that you have the right to an abortion if you were taking contraceptives and they failed. So most of the really famous arguments in this paper actually just occur right away in the introduction. It's in the introduction where she says that the paper will assume that the fetus is a person. It's also in the introduction where she establishes the standard argument against abortion and how she's going to target it, right? So the standard argument against abortion begins with the premise that the fetus is a person, and then concludes that it has a right to life. And then it goes on to say that the right to life would outweigh any rights that the mother might have. Therefore, abortion is immoral. Thompson specifies here in the introduction that she is challenging line 3. And to challenge line 3 in the introduction, she gives the violinist story. You wake up one morning and find yourself in bed with an unconscious violinist, a famous unconscious violinist. He has been found to have a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers has canvassed all the available medical records and found that you alone have the right blood type to help. They have therefore kidnapped you, and last night the violinist's circulatory system was plugged into yours so that your kidneys can be used to extract poison from his blood as well as your own. The director of the hospital now tells you, "Look, we're sorry the Society of Music Lovers did this to you, but still they did it, and the violinist is now plugged into you. To unplug you would be to kill him, but never mind. Here's the kicker, it's only for 9 months. By then he will have recovered from his ailment and can be safely unplugged from you. Is it morally incumbent on you to accede to this situation?" That means, do you have to accept it? "No doubt it would be very nice of you if you did, a great kindness, but do you have to accede to it?" So again, her point is that your right to your body can outweigh another person's right to life. In particular, she thinks if you found yourself plugged in to another adult human being who would require the use of your body for 9 months, you have every right to unplug yourself and say, "No, you cannot use my body for 9 months." Well, you might think that what is relevant here is the fact that you were kidnapped. So this only shows that abortion is okay in the case of rape. Well, that might be what it shows, and that's interesting right there, because that still shows that it is not enough to establish the moral status of the fetus. You also have to show that the moral status of the fetus does not outweigh the woman's right to control her own body. But in any case, Thompson thinks it shows more than that, because she says, well, look, do you think that people have less of a right to life if they were a product of rape? This is actually an argument that is sometimes used by pro-life people. So, but then Thompson says, well, look, unless you think that, the example still shows that your right to your body can outweigh another person's right to life. So, the goal of the violinist argument is to get her foot in the door, to say, okay, we will allow abortions in some situations. Some situations are cases where you are not obligated to give your body to someone else. All right, so the next case that she wants to take care of is the claim that is a case where the mother's life is in danger. And there are people who will say that a mother can't have an abortion even to save her life. And so she introduces a thought experiment. We have a choice of saving a mother or the fetus. Now you might say, well, abortion is a direct killing. You can remember this from the euthanasia debate. But letting the mother die is only letting the mother die. And therefore, abortion in this case is immoral. Well, Thompson turns around and says that the argument assumes that letting die is always better than killing, but there's no good argument for this. So you can see Thompson here has sympathy for the viewpoint that we earlier saw James Rachels advocate. And in general, Thompson thinks, look, a woman has a right to self-defense. When are you allowed to use your own body? Well, one case is when you need it to do that to defend yourself. So if you were hooked up to the violinist, and the violinist wasn't just occupying your body for 9 months, but actually threatening your life, well then clearly you can say, I'm sorry, but this violinist does not have the right to use my body. The next story gets a little stranger. The most common anti-abortion view in Thompson's time and ours is that abortion is only acceptable to save the life of the mother. And this is where she brings in the Henry Fonda story. And the basic moral of the story is that there is a limit to the positive actions that another's right to life can require of you. That is to say, there's only so much you can demand of other people. And here, Thompson uses the example of demanding something of the actor Henry Fonda. He was a popular cowboy actor in her time. Actually, I think by the time this was written, he was already in the twilight of his career, and his brother Peter Fonda had become more famous. But yeah, that's not important. Okay, so this is what she says. If I am sick unto death, and the only thing that will save my life is the touch of Henry Fonda's cool hand on my fevered brow, then all the same I have no right to be given the touch of Henry Fonda's cool hand on my fevered brow. It would be frightfully nice of him to fly in from the West Coast to provide it. It would be less nice, though no doubt well meant, if my friends flew out to the West Coast and carried Henry Fonda back with him. But I have no right at all against anybody that he should do this for me. So, basically, the idea is that you can't simply demand that other people do things to save your life. Thompson highlights this idea that there is a limit to what you can demand of other people with her distinction between good Samaritans and minimally decent Samaritans. This is something that she brings up later at the end of the essay. The idea is, a good Samaritan is someone who goes out of his way to help out someone else. And at the time Thompson was writing, there were very few of what we call Good Samaritan laws on the books. That is, laws that require you to help a stranger in need. Now, in fact, these days there are more Good Samaritan laws on the books than there used to be. Thompson's point, however, is that a law against abortion is requiring people to be very, very good Samaritans indeed, and indeed to give up the use of their bodies for someone else. And this goes beyond normally what we would think of as your obligations to help out others. So, Thompson says that the law should not require us to be good Samaritans, only minimally decent ones. All right. The burglar and the people seed stories. These are the last two of her analogies that I want to look at. She begins by trying to turn the tables here. She says, look, the right to life isn't a right not to be killed, but a right not to be killed unjustly. It is up to the opponent of abortion, she says, to show why abortion is an unjust killing. And she offers a basic reason why abortion might be a just killing, which is that the fetus has no right to be in the uterus in the first place. This might strike you as strange. Where else would you find a fetus but in the uterus? But the point is that there's no contractual relationship. There's no legal right in any way that somehow says, your uterus can be occupied at any time by a fetus that just decides to come into existence. Her example here is a burglar example. She says, a person does not have the right to the use of your home because you left the window open, right? Still less do they have the right to the use of your home because you put bars on the window and they turn out to be defective. If you come home and find a burglar in your apartment, the burglar can't turn around and say to you, well, I know you wanted to keep me out, but now I'm in here. You should have realized that, when you moved into this neighborhood, there was a risk of being robbed, and now that I'm here, I have the right to stay here. She expands this into an even stranger example, where she asks you to imagine that people seeds float in the air, and they can take root in your carpet if you leave the window open. So if you leave the window open, do the people seeds have the right to your house? Well, the analogy is a little strange, but the basic idea is that there is a similarity between your uterus and your house, and complete strangers don't have a right to your house, and similarly, a fetus does not actually have a right to your uterus. So in the fifth section, she makes some concluding remarks. She wonders, are there cases where you don't have a right to disconnect someone from your body, where in fact the violinist is required to stay attached to you? Well, maybe if it was only an hour. You'd have to stay attached to the violinist. Or if pregnancy only lasted for an hour, you would be obligated to go through with a pregnancy. But really, she thinks that doesn't work. If it's true for 9 months, it's true for an hour. In each case, helping someone else out is nice, but not obligatory. Because in general, you don't have a right to things that would be nice. You don't have a right to charity. Charity is, by definition, something that goes above and beyond ordinary obligations. And if you did have a right to charity, then somehow the amount of your other people are required to give you would depend upon how hard it is for them to provide it. And Thompson thinks that is absurd.
The other philosophical argument I want to consider is Marquis. from his paper, Why Abortion is Immoral. Now, Marquis and Thompson are actually talking past each other because Marquis is only out to show that the fetus has the moral status of a person. So his thesis is something that Thompson has conceded for the sake of argument. Nevertheless, he thinks it's sufficient. Part of this is because he's not worrying about exceptional cases. All he wants to do is say that abortion is in the same moral category as killing an adult human being. So any time that you would be justified in killing an adult, you're also justified in killing a fetus. But there are no other situations in which you are justified in killing a fetus. Okay. I am not going to read all of these slides. I'm going to read a few because I want to introduce some vocabulary that Marquis doesn't use. What Marquis is engaged in here is a classic piece of reflective equilibrium. And so I'm going to describe some of his arguments in terms of reflective equilibrium so you can see what's going on. All right. First, though, he has to establish, he has to give you his take on the current debate. I've got some words here describing that. I'll let you read them. Okay, so what Marquis wants to do is establish a theoretical account of the wrongness of killing. And essentially his method for doing this is reflective equilibrium. I've defined reflective equilibrium in a previous PowerPoint. I'll reiterate that definition. It is a process for determining the nature of a concept by finding a rule which covers one's intuitions for a variety of cases. So whenever you are engaged in reflective equilibrium, you have a rule that you're considering, and you have some cases that fall under that rule, or might fall under that rule, that you have strong intuitions about. So here the rules that are being considered are when is it justified to kill someone. Ultimately, this boils down to what creatures have the moral status of a person, that is the level of moral status that gives you the right to life. All right. So one way to see Marquis's analysis of the abortion debate so far is to see it as an example of reflective equilibrium. You begin with the concept, the wrongness of killing. You have an intuition that it is wrong to kill a fetus, right? So on the basis of that, you propose a rule. The rule is that it's wrong to kill living things with human DNA. And this is supposed to cover a lot of your intuitions about when it's wrong to kill. For instance, that it's wrong to kill a fetus, also that it's wrong to kill a normal adult human. Well, here's a problem. We have an intuition that says it's okay to kill a culture of cancer cells. Nevertheless, under the proposed rule, the culture of cancer cells counts. Killing a culture of cancer cells would be a wrong killing. Thus, the culture of cancer cells amounts to a counterexample for the proposed rule. So we have to drop it. The other side of the abortion debate can also be seen in terms of reflective equilibrium. Again, our concept is the wrongness of killing. So pro-choice people start out with the intuition that it is okay to kill a fetus, but of course it's wrong to kill an adult human being. So what they do is you propose a rule that says it's okay to kill things that lack full human rationality. Another way of putting that is that only creatures that are actually sapient have the moral status of a person. This proposed rule runs smack into another intuition. We all believe intuitively that it is wrong to kill a newborn baby. Right? Jesus, babies. Well, the proposed rule would make it okay to kill newborn babies. Thus, the example of a newborn baby becomes a counterexample to the proposed rule. Now, this actually gives you a dilemma. Some people will say, get rid of the rule. That is, just say, look, obviously there are times in which it is wrong to kill something, even though it is not sapient. Now, there are a limited number of philosophers, and you've already read a few, who actually want to do away with the intuition that it is wrong to kill a newborn baby. Few people agree with these philosophers, but that is a logical possibility given the structure of reflective equilibrium. So as I showed you in the reflective equilibrium and moral status PowerPoint, reflective equilibrium is a matter of drawing circles around cases. So here are 4 cases of killing. It's wrong to kill a fetus, it's wrong to kill an infant, it's wrong to kill an adult human, it's wrong to kill a culture of cancer cells. The 2 available lines draw things in, well, the 2 available lines capture the wrong number of cases. The black line, which represents it's wrong to kill all things with human DNA, captures too many cases. The blue line, the sapiens line, captures too few cases. Marquis' solution is his own theory of killing. He goes through some bad theories of the wrongness of killing. You can take a look at those. I list them here. They're in the reading. What he considers as the correct theory is that killing is wrong because it deprives entities of a valuable future like ours. A valuable future like ours. This is the future like ours account of the wrongness of killing. He lists 5 pieces of evidence for this. First of all, it explains why killing is one of the worst things. It fits with the intuitions of dying people that, well, perhaps it doesn't restrict moral status to things that are biologically human. Space aliens, some animals, anything with a future like ours. You can consult the long list in the moral status presentation. Anything with a future like ours might have the moral status of a person and therefore be wrong to kill. This does not entail that active euthanasia is wrong. This is very important because he doesn't want to tie the abortion debate to the euthanasia debate. If someone's future is no longer valuable, or it's bound to be terribly short, then perhaps killing would be acceptable. Moreover, this correctly deals with the potential counterexample of infanticide, which the previous 2 standards could not get straight. Oh, and the cancer cells. One thing that's not listed as a piece of evidence that for the future like ours standard for the wrongness of killing is that it outlaws abortion. I want to repeat that because this is important. Marquis cannot use it as evidence that this standard makes abortion immoral to argue for the standard. The line of reasoning has to work like this. First, there's the evidence for the standard. Then you accept the standard. Then you accept the wrongness of abortion. If you use the wrongness of abortion to argue for the standard, you are arguing in a circle, and that is not logically correct.